Hey everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. On this episode, a Canadian chef who had to overcome obstacle after obstacle to cook in the United States. He couldn't afford culinary school, couldn't convince restaurant owners to hire him because they were unfamiliar with the places he'd worked in Canada. For the longest time, he couldn't even get a visa to be allowed to work here. But he went on to open a place of his own in Cincinnati, Wildweed, named one of America's best new restaurants for 2025 by Bon Appétit. Here's David Jackman. Chef, how you doing? Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. How are you?
I could not be better. Cincinnati. Major food town?
Maybe in the works. We've been getting quite a bit of attention lately.
Why is that, do you think?
I think Cincinnati is a pretty great city in general. It's often overlooked. We get called a flyover state, so to speak. But I think one of the redeeming qualities of this place is that we really welcome people who aren't from here to do their things, and we support them. A number of the people that have created incredible restaurants aren't necessarily from this city. Some are not from the state. Myself, I'm not even from the country.
Where are you from?
My dialect is acclimated for the most part, but you might be able to hear that I'm Canadian.
Do you have dual citizenship?
I do, yeah.
So where were you born?
I was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada.
Cold.
Very cold, yeah. Our nickname is Winterpeg, Manitoba.
What was life like growing up there?
It's a pretty quiet city, but there's a lot of similarities to the city that I live in now. We both have abandoned subways. There's a perimeter highway. There's a river that runs through it. There's a arts and culture hub right off the downtown. Downtown is constantly trying to rehabilitate itself. Of course, the first thing that everyone asks you is, where'd you go to high school? When I moved here, it was comfortable. There was a number of stops before that, though.
First off, as a kid, was your family food-oriented?
My grandparents always had a garden. My dad worked in the industry briefly, just as odd jobs, nothing huge and professional. But yeah, for the most part, food centered around my family. My heritage is French-Canadian, and food was always at the center of the table, whether it's Christmas dinner, meat pies, or, like garden peas out of the garden in the summer at the lake, or picking fish out of the water at the lake as a kid. So food was always kind of present. There was an identity, but I didn't grow up in a chef family. I didn't grow up going to restaurants as a kid as much as other people might have.
Were you in the kitchen with your mom or your grandmother? Was it something that interested you from a young age?
Yeah, I did a lot of baking with my mother. My mother did a lot of baking for most of my childhood. She raised me and my two sisters on her own, so there wasn't a lot of time to cook. There was a lot of convenience meals, but baking was kind of where she put her energy.
When did you look up and say, I think I want to do this for a living?
I think I kind of fell into it. The line is a little blurry. As a young teenager in the punk rock scene, trying to cause trouble and find ways to buy drinks and stuff, you needed disposable income. So got a job at a pizza place, as any young person will. And then, you'll find trouble doing that. And as things kind of progressed, I was already kind of cooking. It was just in different ways. So once I left that job, I got into another dishwashing position. And what's the natural progression from there? You want to get out of the dish area. Those guys seem like they're having a lot more fun than you are. So you'd push. There was this really great chef that I'd become later friends with named Makoto Ono that had this saying, onwards and upwards. And so it was always kind of taking that mindset of onwards and upwards to try improve yourself. But there was a number of things that kind of just kept tying me back to culinary. I was in a lot of activist groups and community-focused groups that I would do something called Food Not Bombs, where we were essentially repurposing food that would go into a waste cycle, whether it's through a grocery store or through dumpsters for a bread company that throw out misshapen loaves, and we'd create meals for people directly straight on the street. I saw food as an opportunity to kind of have a voice and make change in your community. And being a chef is a sidebar to that, kind of. Obviously, I've taken this career and seen where it can go. But really, the most important thing with food is how do you make an impact on your community?
Well, what was your path? Did you go to culinary school?
I tried. I was a high school dropout and got accepted into the Culinary Institute of America. I couldn't afford it. After that, I applied to George Brown College and moved to Toronto, and they didn't accept me. I got there, I was expecting to get accepted and didn't have enough money, so I started pounding the pavement with a resume. I bought a magazine there called Toronto Life. It was their best restaurants edition, just so happened to be. I went to all of their top 10 new restaurants and dropped my resume straight into the hands of the chefs. The day I got the job that I ended up taking, he said, well, can you get back here in an hour and a half and come do a stage? And I said, yes. So I walked down the street and started running to go pick up my knives and get back.
What restaurant was that?
It was a little restaurant called Loire, a little French neo-bistro, a little bit ahead of its time, 40 seats. It was on Harvard Street in Toronto. It's no longer there. The chef was Jean-Charles Dubois.
I've read that that was kind of your culinary school, was it?
In a way, it was. It was classic French training of, if you want to learn something, show up early. I just kept doing that. You want to clean fish? Show up early. You want to clean foie gras? Show up early. You want to learn how to clean crabs? All right, well, you need to go to the market and buy crabs every day if we're going to be putting crab on the menu. Within 6 months of being there, I saw some of the culinary students at the school that I had applied start coming out of the culinary school, and they were starting below me.
That's where you got into urban gardening?
That or Vancouver. I think I've always been into gardening. I grew up with a large garden at my family's house. And so when I moved to urban cities, it was, how do I find ways to introduce this part of my life and this part of my existence into my daily life in a larger city. So whether it's planting things in a little sidewalk or finding empty lots and dropping seeds in it, I think anytime you live in a large city, it kind of begs for you to search for those kinds of opportunities a little better.
Okay, you're in Toronto. Then you go to Vancouver. What was your path? You bounced around a bunch of cities.
I've bounced around a bunch of cities, and the idea was, how do I get to New York City? Toronto was kind of the first step towards trying to approach, where do you go to one of these great culinary cities that's going to have all the greats there and you're going to learn and grow? I would go to internet cafes in Toronto and read menus. So I just started applying places in New York. I went to Blue Hill, the one in the city. I staged at a Voce at the Time Warner Center with Missy Robbins. I also joined Corton at one point. But the whole idea was I'd like to get to New York, but I didn't have a visa. So it wasn't ever going to be able to be possible. I realized once I got there, everyone wanted to give you an opportunity to prove yourself, but they didn't really have the energy or time or resources to sponsor someone. There's 3 people outside that can do the job. Why put in the effort? So when I came back from New York back to Canada, the thought was, well, where do I go? And the idea was still, how do I get to New York? Well, Danielle Ballou at the time had a restaurant in Vancouver. So did Jean-Georges. And the idea was, well, maybe if I get into some of these restaurants there, start being part of the community here, there's going to be more opportunities and links to move to New York in the future. I moved to Vancouver and it became probably the most influential city I've ever lived in, besides maybe my hometown and the one I live in now. I started working with someone named Andrea Carlson, who now owns Burdock & Co. and Harvest and Bar Gobo. But it was actually when she was at Bishop's, and that was the first job I had when I arrived. The connection to ingredients, the farm-to-table ethos, the drive that came with that food really stood out to me, and it kind of followed or built the path that would then become the rest of my history in Vancouver.
What kind of food were you making there?
Very Pacific Northwest, very farm-to-table. John Bishop, the owner of Bishop's, was known as kind of an Alice Waters type figure in Canada. Quite gentle, usually on the floor. We had plenty of really great guests. I remember cooking for Ryan Reynolds there. I remember having Elvis Costello at the table every couple weeks when he was in town with Diana Krall. It was a pretty cool spot to be in at the time. No longer there also, but Andrea Carlson moved on to do a number of great restaurants, and I was part of the opening team at Burdock and helped kind of the transition with her little grocery store Harvest before moving on to start taking positions, leading kitchens of my own.
Did you work for Ballou? Did you work for Jean-Georges?
No. Ballou ended up leaving. Jean-Georges' restaurant didn't really have connections like I thought, so I didn't bother. By then I was kind of hooked on the Pacific Northwest, and I was taking classes foraging. I was taking bike rides on islands every weekend. I was seeing orcas. I was riding the seawall. I was going to farmers markets, 3, 4, 5 farmers markets a week around the city. I ended up renting a house. I had a huge garden. At one point I had chickens. That city is the Pandora's box of anything you want, because you always have this incredible pantry and palette of seasonings that you can work with.
Was Vancouver where you first became an executive chef?
Yeah. I'd kind of taken off from working with Andrea Carlson and went to go stage in California, seeing if there was maybe another opportunity to grow. And my career has always been, how do I chase the best people I possibly could chase to learn the most I could possibly learn. When I ended up going to California, I ended up spending some time at Atelier Cren.
3 Michelin stars.
2 at the time, definitely on their way to their 3rd star, and then a restaurant at Meadowood, which was 3 stars.
And what did this experience add to your knowledge, your cooking ethos?
I think those places, they set standards. Some of them set standards of culture, some of them set standards of excellence. But one of the biggest things I remember at Meadowood, and this was day one, there was a sliding glass frosted door, and on the door it said, "He who wants the fruit must first climb the tree." You walk into the kitchen, didn't know anyone, didn't know where I was supposed to report, but I could smell the pot of sauce simmering across the kitchen. And the reason that was because the standard of cleanliness in this restaurant was so high, there was no dead smells. and you could smell this pot from across the room. And that was, to me, a search of excellence. When the food is so clear and transparent that you can smell it across the room.
After that, did you go back to Vancouver? Where'd you go?
I was in San Francisco. I ran out of money. I had a very close friend who had also been a mentor earlier in my career. His father's still a mentor of mine named Doug Stephen. And he calls me up and he's like, hey, I'd really like you to take over my little bistro. I was like, no, I don't want to cook bistro food. I don't want to do this.
In Vancouver?
In Vancouver, yeah. I had no money. I don't know who I was bluffing. It was like, do you want to come back? And I was like, well, what's in it for me? I'm in these great restaurants. What pulls me away? And he said, well, how about full menu control? And I was like, okay, executive chef. Instead of chef de cuisine, it's executive chef. I was like, all right, I kind of need this. Can you give me a little sign-on bonus? Because I needed a 3-day Greyhound ticket home or whatever. He obliged. And the second I got off that Greyhound, walked into the restaurant, threw out the old chef's cards as an arrogant young chef and started telling everyone before we start learning anything, we're going to start cleaning this kitchen.
How'd the staff react?
Some of them quit. Some of them liked it. Some of them were excited.
Back after this.
The restaurant was pretty quiet. We were trying to build something that wasn't working back. It was a small, 35-seat restaurant, 35 in the winter, 55 in the summer with an extra 20 seats on a patio on the side street. A little small restaurant. The kitchen was minuscule. It was an oyster bar that was a little celebrated for being like a French bistro of sorts. They do bœuf bourguignon and things like that. It was that point where I was like, well, maybe I can help create an identity to this place.
So what'd you do?
Well, we kept oysters. We weren't going to leave oysters. Oysters are a huge passion of mine now, and I'd already had a pretty big passion of them then. We were working with quite a number of great farmers. I've gone on to run a couple other oyster programs too, but that was kind of where I got my feet into oysters. And I just started slowly changing the menu. We printed it in-house so we could have all sorts of opportunities to change it whenever we wanted.
So what were you making?
I always had a couple pastas on the menu. I distinctly remember one with sprouted grains and braised radishes and some sort of squash ravioli with black garlic and this Care Philly cheese from Farmhouse Cheeses in British Columbia. It was whatever the market had. We served Milan's tomatoes, one of the most well-known tomato farmers in the Pacific Northwest. We used items from Soul Food Farms, which is Michael Abelman's project, where they took over empty lots and bars and little spaces in the city and essentially urban farmed. It was kind of fun because at that time they were just building. And so we got to work with the best ingredients. Trout Lake Farmers Market, in my opinion, the best one in the city, was just down the street. So trekking food back on my bike wasn't hard. I was friends with a great bread baker that had taught one of my mentors named Chris Brown. And I spent a couple nights overnight baking with him and learning from him. And we used really great meat from Two Rivers Meats, at the time a pretty small operation. And, I would go and volunteer and break down cows every weekend. I think I was helping the restaurant find a voice of what they wanted to do at the same time I was finding a voice for myself. And that was when I realized that I'm probably ready to start leading things.
So you move on. Where do you go?
I go back home. I had some family situations that weren't so great. My sister was in the hospital and I decided to go spend a year back home and see if I could focus on family a little bit. No one would hire me back home. I was in younger days quite the provocateur, full of piss and vinegar, as some people would say. And it was hard to get a job back home. I had a reputation.
A lot of people thought you were an asshole.
Yeah, of course.
What'd you do?
I ended up getting a job at a hotel. It was a little boutique hotel called the Inn at the Forks. They were opening a new restaurant called Smith, and this chef, who was also kind of known as an asshole, was leading it. I was like, okay, well, I'll go in. I'll see if I can get a line cook job. Executive chef to line cook, it's a little humbling. It's always good to take a step back, but sometimes it takes a lot out of you. So I started as a line cook. I looked around and saw people were trying to edge on me and push me around, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I need to step up. And started cutting them down, and then found out that the executive chef that was hired was doing a pretty terrible job. I mean, I could see it from someone who had held that position. I watched him do a number of different things, like steal food out the back door. The costing was completely off. There was no technique applied. He would always be offline. There was never any support for his team. And I was like, well, I've run a kitchen. And so I put my name in the hat. I actually reached out to the owner of the hotel and miraculously got a contact back, and we started talking. And it was like, yeah, you know what? I think you'd be a great replacement for him. Let's make this transition. I did it for a year. I didn't like the format of the menu. I didn't really like the style of the food, but I knew how to create it for them. It was humbling. I would go in the summer and I would go pick mushrooms and I would sell them to myself and cook them at the restaurant. I was like, I just need to get something closer to what my passion is and what I do for a living. So that ended.
How many other places did you move through before you got back to the States?
At that point, I was like, I'm going to try get some jobs in the States again. Let's see what the market's like. Let's see who might offer me an opportunity. And so I went to Chicago Chicago. I spent some time at Grace. Really didn't sit well with me. I didn't like the culture. I didn't like the attitudes in the kitchen.
Did you have how'd you get a visa?
I didn't. I was not being paid at the time. And you work for as long as you can until someone wants to pay you.
Who paid you?
No one. So I left.
So you're in Chicago. All you can do is stage.
All you can do is stage.
You're making no money. You have no visa.
Yeah. I mean, that's the situation for a lot of Canadians who wanted to chase Michelin stars. Now Michelin exists in Canada, but at the time, you save your money, you go on a trip, you work for as long as you can, and hopefully someone will find a way to sponsor you. And if they don't, you don't.
So how did you eventually get the right to stay here, to get paid?
Well, I do have a wife now who is American.
You met and married your wife in Chicago?
No. I went down to Nashville after that, directly from Chicago. I ended up hanging out at a restaurant for a little while called the Catbird Seat. I was kind of working under Trevor Moran.
Well, it's a famous restaurant. It's known as a chef incubator.
And Trevor Moran, I think that was a place that he helped create his own identity. Incredibly talented chef. Went on to open another restaurant with the company called Locust. I spent a while there trying to work out visas with them and trying to figure that out and having trouble figuring out how we were going to do it.
Let me back you up 1 second.
Yes.
You just looked up one day in Chicago and said, what the hell, I'm moving to Nashville?
No, when I was in Winnipeg, I planned all along, I'm going to go check out 3 cities and see which one makes sense.
Chicago,
Nashville,
and
San Francisco.
Okay, so you meet this guy who's the chef at the Catbird Seat.
Yep.
You apply?
I apply to do a stage, see if it makes sense, working internship. And if it makes sense, bring me on. And if it doesn't, so be it. So I went, spent a week there, went back up to Vancouver. We were trying to figure out visas. I bought a ticket back down, was waiting for things to happen. He said he'd get it done and it never got done. But I was back there and I spent about 5 months sleeping on couches and trying to learn as much as I could about the system. And
still not being paid?
Still not being paid. He was talking about, opening this other restaurant as he was leaving. We continued talking. I went back to Vancouver. I was like, you know what? I've got a home here. I'll use this as a landing pad. We'll see where it goes. I started doing little pop-ups in Vancouver at that point. We started doing a whole number of different chef gigs. I ran an Italian restaurant. I ran a farm-to-table restaurant that had a little bar next to it that was natural wine. I went back and actually helped close Merchant's Oyster Bar, that first restaurant I was executive chef at. They had decided to close their doors. And so I spent the last 2 months inviting a bunch of different collaborative chefs in and doing different events every night. And then also ran a private events and catering company under David Hawksworth. It went from 1 million in sales to 5 million in sales that year. And it was pretty exhausting. And at that point I was navigating, where am I going to go? I'm going to try get a visa to France or something. I went down to Nashville to go hang out with my friends Tom Bayless and Trevor Moran again. I met my wife on that trip. All those ties to Nashville and all the reasons for going back, it ended up culminating in meeting my partner.
Your wife's also in the biz.
Yeah, she is.
Was she working at the Catbird Seat?
No, she had actually worked with Trevor at another restaurant called La Selle as a little stopping ground for him. And she was trying to wait out Henrietta Red's opening under Julia Keelan. So she was working with Julia Keelan there and then also working at a dive bar, pretty famous dive bar called Dino's, cooking burgers. And so I actually met her at the dive bar. I go back to Canada. We're talking. I'm working on getting another visa to a different country now. Canada has a program where you can work and travel essentially for a year in most European countries. I hadn't taken advantage of it. Nothing was happening with the visa application. Had a couple interviews. I'm fluent in French, so I was able to do that. I was offered a position, but it was once you get here, you can have a position, but we're not going to hire you now. It was going to be starting at the bottom again. And I understood North America. I believed strongly that if I, tried to learn from as many different markets in this continent as I could, then, I'd be a pretty well-rounded chef, especially for one catering to this market. So I was talking to my wife, now wife, and I was like, I don't, things aren't working. She was in Cincinnati. She had moved here for a job opportunity, lower cost of living, not having 4 roommates. And I said, okay, well, I'll come check it out. And by coming and checking it out, I completely threw out my visa to Paris intentionally. I was like, you know what? I think this might be something worth pursuing. I was going through a pretty hard time. Things weren't working the way they were working. So I said, let's take a step back. Let's re-navigate what that moment in your life is. And maybe you take a step forward after you've taken that step back. So I came here.
So you meet the woman who's going to be your wife.
Yep.
In Nashville. You go back to Canada.
She was already in the midst of a move to Cincinnati. She's like, this ain't going to work.
Nashville's not going to work.
Me and her aren't going to work because obviously I'm a Canadian. She's American. She's living in Nashville, but she's moving to Cincinnati. I'm somewhere between Vancouver and my hometown right now and trying to move to Paris.
So you go back to Canada. Doesn't feel like your career is going where you want it to go. You guys get back in touch after she's in Cincinnati?
Yeah, we keep talking. We keep talking well after she's moved.
Does she say, why don't you come to Cincinnati? Or do you say, hey?
I think it was kind of just always a subject in those conversations was like, okay, well, if you want to come visit, come visit. And so I bought a plane ticket.
And we'll be right back. So you get to Cincinnati. Is this where you finally get a paying job and a visa?
Eventually, I'm here and there's not really any way I could get a job. No one even knows the restaurants that I was working at. You know, I was staging places and they were like, you could obviously cook, but I don't know anything about these places. Most of your experience is in Canada and I've never been to Canada. But I've already fallen in love with the girl. I spend 10 days here. I fall in love with the city. I say, how do I make this work? Do I go to Toronto? Do I go to Vancouver? Do I go to Winnipeg? How do I wait to get a visa process going? How do we get this working? So I went to Montreal, started staging around. It's coming up on Christmas and my mom's, what, you're going to spend Christmas alone in Montreal? Why are you being so stupid? Just go back to Cincinnati. So I did. I got a Greyhound ticket, went back to Cincinnati, spent Christmas there. She proposed to me.
Whoa.
And I said, okay, well, I guess we're going to make this work. Obviously, I still don't have work, so I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to make this work. So I go back to Vancouver. I do a number of events. I do a little catering on New Year's Eve, which had already been in the books anyways, on Galiano Island at this beautiful resort for a number of people. I do a couple pop-ups outside of a coffee shop that I helped consult on briefly. I cook in my friends' restaurants a little bit to gain some cash and moved to Cincinnati with $800, a knife roll, and some t-shirts, and that was 7 years ago. We quickly got married, quickly applied for a visa, spent a year working under the table for someone who was so understaffed that they couldn't navigate not having someone work there. And then, I eventually got my residency and started working legally. And so as I got my residency, a lot of opportunities opened up. Right before COVID, I went down to Nashville and, we had been talking about, hey, maybe I help open Trevor Moran's new restaurant with him. We got along quite well, but the opportunity that actually came up was, do you want to run the catbird seat? And I said, well, that's kind of the dream job 5 years ago. I would have loved to. I don't know where I'm at right now, but let's give it a shot. I got there, and I think by the time I got there, I'd already outgrown the desire to truly take it to where I wanted to take it. And my first day was the tornado that hit East Nashville, completely ruined the city and the energy of the city for a little while. But also COVID happened so fast. And then, as that closed, I went on to do a bunch of projects with the company, adjacent to the company, Strategic Hospitality. I helped out at Henrietta Red. I did a number of relief programs all through COVID, partnering with different people. So I was cooking for nursing homes and the COVID testing sites and drive-throughs at churches. And then 30 or 40 meals left over every day, I'd just drive them around downtown. And so we started feeding people, my wife and I. At that point, she and I were working together and we realized that the things that we were doing worked. Why not keep pursuing working together? In Cincinnati, we had also kind of worked together. We started a pop-up. We had also worked in the same restaurant that I was being paid under the table. She left to take on a chef position at a wine bar.
So you guys went back to Cincinnati?
Yeah, after COVID, I helped open Locust with Trevor. After all these years of talking about it, it ended up happening. But at that point, I kind of realized that I needed to do my own thing. So I was navigating the purchase of a restaurant in Cincinnati, and we used that as an excuse to move back. Upon moving back, that completely fell apart, and we had to re-navigate what we were going to do and started right from scratch. So that's when we heavily turned to pop-ups.
What'd you do?
Our pop-up that we had before we left had some pretty big traction. We would have about 100 people show up every week for different handmade pastas. And it was called Sunday Sauce. And we were like, well, you know what? Everyone keeps asking us for something like this back. But we didn't want to do an Italian thing. We didn't want to, so it was, how do we create our own identity through this? And so we just had a daughter. I took on a job that just wasn't very sensible for me. An oyster bar, but the owner didn't listen. I knew what a great restaurant and a not great restaurant was, and the path we were leading to wasn't, fair to the people in our community or to each other, and it definitely wasn't fair to me. It was just burning me out for no reason. So I left it. I had just had a daughter 3-4 months before. It was a big risk. How do we support ourselves with our own labor? And how do we reclaim our own labor and create something that's more equitable for our community than existed before? And how do we give back to a place that we love that's been so loving to us?
And the pop-ups were an answer to that?
Yeah, pop-ups were an answer. We built a 4x6 foot table in our house, in our home kitchen, and then just started spending every week just making pastas, found locations, kept changing locations. We started at a juice bar on their Sundays afternoons after they closed It was empty. Cool, let's take it. So we would do that. Slowly that built into a couple days and then that shut down. But there was another place in Findlay Market, one of the most beautiful outdoor markets in the country, where you can get all sorts of great produce and local goods. And there was another restaurant in there that was closing down, but we didn't know that yet. And so we started doing Sundays there. That was even more functional because it had full stoves. It was the first time we did a pop-up that actually had a stove and not just induction burners. And we had plenty of seats. We had a bar. People could just come in and pop in. So we started building that. Then that restaurant decided it would close. So we rented the space temporarily. And we did it 3 days a week for about 3 or 4 months. And then that kind of ended and we had started pursuing a space, the space that ended up being the restaurant that's behind me. And we still had a huge gap. Where do you go from your pop-up to your restaurant? And how do you support your family? And how do you support your life? And how do you support the people who've already signed on to be part of this project? And so we navigated another residency. We were doing events weekly. We were working with our friends at Heart and Crew doing private events every week.
Well, I read that you did like 225 events.
More than that, yeah. Over 250 for sure.
And this is while you're getting Wildweed, your restaurant, ready?
Yeah. We didn't even know what Wildweed was going to become. We let it naturally become what it is. So we were doing events with some really great winemakers, all these things. We decided to do a tour, but we were navigating renting out another space for a few months, another restaurant space that was closed. It took so long to get that going that we decided to do a tour.
Which took you where?
We went to Vermont for an event. We went to Michigan to Benton Harbor with Houndstooth. We did an event at Bastion in Nashville. We did one in Lexington out of a wine bar that didn't even have a kitchen. And then we did different events in Cincinnati back and forth. We did something with El Camino Bakery here. We did something at the coffee shop down the street called 1215, who, are good friends. The owner at the time also produced a lot of vegetables on her farm. We had a great working relationship already. And all the while we were doing events and food for the tasting room at Heart and Crew and different private events there and trying to build back until we got into this new residency.
When were you able finally to open the restaurant?
So it was July 2024.
How did you finance it? Did you get partners?
People approach you when you're doing something cool. They want to be part of it. Financially, it makes sense. You're drawing people to a city. You're drawing people to a restaurant.
So the pop-ups generated investors that generated a brick-and-mortar restaurant.
And it generated the landlord that I have, a prominent landlord in the neighborhood that wanted to see something like what we're doing in their community and saw it as a financially responsible gamble to take. There was a tenant improvement package. I searched for investors. We did a GoFundMe. We checked all the boxes. We got money every way we could.
Were you an instant success?
We were full right from the start. I would say right now, it's our second winter. It's probably the slowest we've ever been, but we've learned how to operate on, weekdays are slow, but weekends are busy. So we're good.
So you're doing okay in a challenging environment.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, you get a chance to finally open a place of your own.
Yeah.
What is it?
We're a new American restaurant. All jokes included. I am a new American. I'll take it. We're a new American restaurant that focuses on wildcrafted ingredients.
What is wildcrafted?
So you look right here behind me. There's a little wild leek, little ramp.
In neon.
And if you go around the corner in the restaurant, there's an 18 by 4 foot painting of wild mushrooms. My family, my daughter, my wife, and I, we go foraging every weekend in the summer. Sometimes we take trips up to Michigan for morels, and sometimes we take trips down to Tennessee for a honey pot of chanterelles that I know about. A lot of our food is centered around, what makes this community special, the ingredients that our farmers are growing, keeping dollars in our community and supporting places like Urbanstead Cheese, a great cheesemaker that's winning awards around the country for their Ohio natural rind Goudas and great cheddars and their fresh pork. Incredible stuff. We try to give dollars back to our community by supporting great farmers that do great work. We work pretty strongly with Just Farmin' in Hamilton, as well as Darkwood Farms, as well as we have a list of 20 farms that we work with. Next week, we're getting a half cow from a friend who raises Black Angus cattle. This week, we're getting a whole lamb from our friends at Freedom Run Farm.
Where did you learn to break down whole animals?
Probably goes back to when I was starting to be a chef. And the biggest thing was, how do you learn to do as much as you possibly can? Because you don't want to be without that skill set. At least that was the world that I grew up in, like watching people like Wiley Dufresne make weird shit. You're saying, well, how do I do that? Same thing applied to everything you did. And he would say it too. How do you break down a cow? How do you break down a pig? And so the cow part, I'm a little rusty. I'm going to need to do a little research before next week.
Better crack those books.
But I broke down cows with Two Rivers Meats in British Columbia when I was there and volunteering on Wednesday mornings in their fridge with their main Italian butcher. So it's always, how do you fill the gap in your career? You fill it with a story and you fill it with experience and a skill set. Some people chase, the French Laundry, this place, that place, all the places that have these names. I chased a story. I chased an experience. I chased an opportunity to tell something that no one else got to see.
And you tell those stories through your food.
Absolutely. Yeah. And some people hear it and some people don't. The story's not for everyone. It doesn't need to be. At the end of the day, we're supporting our community through these stories. And whether you read the story or not, the food is delicious. And that's the point.
Well, let's talk about the food. When I come to your place, I can either order a la carte or I could sit at the chef's counter and it's a tasting menu, right?
Yeah. So we do 2 different dining experiences. Both are serviced from the same kitchen. So it's really important to know that the standard is the same. It's just a different dining style. So at our chef's counter, we have 12 seats. We do approximately 12 plates.
And what are some of those 12 plates today?
So today we have a little pie tea with smoked walleye.
What is that?
Pie tea is a little Malaysian pie tart, little cracker of sorts made with rice flour, and it's stuffed with little smoked walleye, kind of like a smoked walleye salad kind of vibe, with nukazuke pickle, which is a pickle and rice bran, Japanese style pickle. And then we made batarga out of some of the walleye that was really fresh that had roe sacks a few months ago. And we cured and dried them and created this beautiful roe that grates over top. So that's one of them. We use that Urbanstead Cork cheese and some really great Japanese garlic shoots, negi, from our friend Steve at Just Farmin'. We put those together in a courgeon. Courgeon's braided pasta. It's braided to resemble a wheat sheaf. We actually use a hot water dough because we feel the bite is a lot softer and nicer. That's getting a caramelized yeast sauce seasoned with Parmesan shoyu. So we make soy sauce using all of our Parmesan rinds in the restaurant.
Ooh, that is the ultimate umami.
It is a bomb. Yeah, it is incredible. And so we season that. We have a secondary sauce, red wine shoe. We shave Ohio Wagyu beef over top of it really thinly. And we serve it with sprouted amaranth. And that's our pasta course on our tasting menu. Now, if you're going to dine in our dining room, what you're going to get, one of our signature dishes is inspired by like a Vietnamese rice noodle bowl, but it's a striped tortelli. And this tortelli has 2 different lines of dough. There's a red dough and a yellow dough, striped back and forth, and we layer them and make this beautiful pinstripe dough that's stuffed with local chicken from our friends at Perch Farm. It's a chicken sausage using Ranger chickens, little chilies, little garlic, little shallots. And then we serve that with a smoked shrimp and chicken sauce, a little sauteed shrimp, like a Ngoc Cham style vinegar using some really nice vinegars from Keepwell Vinegar in Pennsylvania. And then we do crispy shallots and herb salad, very reminiscent of like a Vietnamese rice noodle bowl, inspired by my travels, both in Asia and working in the Pacific Northwest. We also put on a tripe pasta this week with caramelized wheat.
Tripe pasta?
Tripe pasta, braised in summer tomatoes.
Pardon me, I don't perceive the Cincinnati dining crowd as being particularly adventurous. I'm sure I'm wrong. But tripe's not a real popular dish, is it?
They're not the most adventurous dining population until they trust you. Once they trust you, they're willing to try the things because every time they've put their trust in you, it's delicious. That's not our number one seller. It never will be. But we have summer tomatoes. We have a little fennel from a local farm. They're all braised down with this tripe. We finish it with a little ginger vinegar. We finish it with a crispy, chili crisp kind of vibe and some beautiful mountain style cheese called Tom Devinston. We have a double ravioli, like a doppio.
That got written up.
That version is not the version we're running right now, but yes.
Esquire magazine, you were one of their best new restaurants in what, 24? Yeah.
Yeah, it was right after we opened, actually.
Yeah, they wrote signature dish was the doppio ravioli featuring brown buttered beans, local quark,
like a soft Germanic style cheese. Yep.
Foraged lobster mushrooms and fresh basil.
Yeah.
What's going on in your head that comes up with that?
Probably have to dissect that thing to figure out what's going on in there. But I think a long career in seeing different styles and different versions of dishes, you start to make the links in your head. You start to find the high notes, the low notes. There's some musical kind of component to that. I forget the name of it, but there's actually some, condition where you see these notes and correlate them to other things that I've always seen food as one of those things. For instance, right now, our doppio ravioli has squash and quark, which are 2 very comforting ingredients together, cheese and squash. With that, we have a crab apple butter, little chicories, a little preserved lemon vinaigrette, little celery. And so you have a little bitter notes, you have little bright notes, you have little caramelized notes, and then you have bitterness from the endive. And it's finding those little pieces that kind of connect together and create a sum greater than their parts.
You change the menu a lot.
Always.
And I've seen you quoted on this topic, being consistent. How are you consistent when you're changing things?
We're being consistently better. We're consistently striving to be better.
You use the term genuineness.
Yeah, genuinity, authenticity.
How do you define those? What makes your food authentic or genuine?
Well, you don't manipulate it too much, but you don't manipulate it too little. You try to find a way to create sums greater than their parts. I think any tabletop book from any chef that we've seen over the last 20 years will rarely tell you how to just cook a recipe. They'll tell you how to cook a component. And our restaurant is a workshop on how do we find ways to make better components. Some restaurants strive to create the dish. We strive to create the component. And that component, because we know chicken of the woods works with tomatoes, it works with mushrooms, it works with egg, it works with yeast, it works with foie gras, it creates a sum greater than their parts. And so the more we strive, and like we go into tomato season one year and we know that we make tomato raisins and we make tomato powder out of their skin after salting and fermenting them so that the natural acidity comes out. Well, we have two components and we started this year with these two components already ready in our bank. Well, now what do we do when we move into the next year? Well, we already have a repertoire of how we approach these ingredients. How do we approach them next year to push that forward? It's not necessarily a lack of consistency. It's just that you zoom out a little bit and you start seeing, well, there's a consistency in using these techniques and ingredients, but we may use them in a different way. We may find better ways to use them and better ways to approach them. In the same way that a restaurant may have a dish all year, we may bring a dish back next year, but how will we do it better than we did last year?
Beyond the ingredients, beyond the food, what's the future look like for you?
Hopefully growth for the business. The goals we have are to grow into more than just this place, but we're happy to be here for as long as we need to be to make it sustainable and to make it successful. There are a few lists that we haven't been on that would be nice, but that's not why we do it.
You've been on an awful lot of lists.
Yeah, we have. I'm grateful for that. The more you cook for those reasons, the less you're cooking for yourself and your communities sometimes. So instead of focusing on what's going on the plate, you're focusing on who's going through the front door. You're spending all the energy on the who's instead of the, oh, wow, let's make sure everyone's having a great time. You can lose focus sometimes. But for us, I think growth is just staying where we are and building, hopefully having a little more presence. Continuing to have a spotlight on our community would be a great thing. That's why we approach these lists and try to put our best foot forward, because without that, we don't have the community that's supported in the same way. I think that's the future.
You are pretty heavily involved in social efforts to combat food insecurity and such.
I have. Our friend Steve did lose some money when his farm was closed, and I think a lot of people are affected by that, and that would be a little challenging if he closed. And then in addition, we also have a local food bank we would like to support. We try to put $1 towards our most popular dish towards them. Yeah, we do all the efforts we can. It would be rude not to.
The restaurant business has been going through some tough times. Prices are up, restaurants are closing. There are those who say fine dining is dying. Your feelings about the future of the biz?
I think fine dining will always have a home somewhere in some form. We try to remove the unnecessary elements in our own business just to make sure that it's still welcoming and you can come in t-shirt and jeans. That's sometimes how I want to eat anyways. Restaurants, yeah, I think we're all facing a really challenging time. I think last summer in our city alone, there was a lot of violence, but people also don't stay in Cincinnati in the summer. They go travel elsewhere. So a lot of the boom that you get in some other cities doesn't happen here. It actually has an exodus. And then same thing in January, everyone struggles. On average, eggs went up 30% last year over the year. And that's, they went up quite significantly and then they dropped down. And the end result of that is about 30% increase. Flour is 30% higher. Most things are 30% higher, pretty much across the board. You can only charge so much for pasta. We kind of hit a threshold already. So we kind of need to take it on a chin in that case. We do the same thing that chefs have always done. We create modest dishes with braised meat and tripe. And we use a little bit of chicken and stretch it a long way. We have a blood sausage dish with scallop instead of just scallop, because then it brings down the price. We make our own. We don't buy it. We find creative ways to work those margins in the same way. At the same time, I think labor is higher than it's ever been, with reason, because everything's more expensive and everyone needs to make a little more money than they used to. I get it. I'm in the same boat. My business is in the same boat. Really, I think something's going to have to give soon. I think it's going to have to be somewhere along the side of rent prices and perhaps some sort of tax credits of some sort. I don't know what those are. As a new business owner, this is a new job for me, being that that role. So we're still learning. But I think there's a lot of people that could tell you a little more what our industry really, really needs right now. And to be honest, we be creative. We preserve things in the summer. We forage things that might cost $20 a pound if you were to buy. I pick hundreds of pounds of them. And we find ways and we price them the same as if I were to sell them, even though I don't. We be creative. We build creativity into the system so that way we can reach the margins we need to reach.
Allow me to say good luck.
Thank you.
In a tough environment going forward. It sounds like you have done something remarkable.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're pretty proud of what we do, so thank you for recognizing how exciting it is.
And thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I very much enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
David Jackman on Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. I'll see you next time. And hey, mention us to your friends. Tell them to check us out wherever they get their podcasts.